Hey, what's going on? You're here because you want to know what Bitcoin is. You've been hearing about Bitcoin and blockchain on the news. You've seen, articles about it on the internet and stuff. Maybe a friend or a family member has spoken to you about it or asked you about it. And you want to know so that you can explain this to people and understand it yourself and maybe even get in on it. So I'm going to explain this to you over the next couple of minutes, and I guarantee that when you're done, you will walk away understanding exactly what the whole buzz is about. So basically, to define what is Bitcoin, it's the first decentralized digital currency, right? And to understand what that is, we can go into the word currency. What exactly is currency? Well, it's the fact or quality of being generally accepted or in use. That means that the money that we use only has value because we say it has value, right? Now, not us in particular as individuals, but as a whole, as a society, right? Our government goes ahead and they print this money for us, and we all accept this as legal tender, right? We say, okay, this is viable for trading goods and services and for the repayment of debts, okay? Because money in and of itself is simply a verifiable record that everyone accepts. In the past, this used to be things like seashells or salt, right? Eventually it became gold, and that lasted for thousands of years. People used gold as currency and to store value. And then it went on to be paper money. And now this is the next stage of that evolution. And as you'll see, if you're in the developed world, you've already been using digital currency. The only difference is that this digital currency has been a representative of your paper currency, right? So we're working with an old system, but we currently swipe our cards at the store to represent this paper currency that we supposedly have stored up at the bank. So that brings us to the question of what is a blockchain? Because you can't truly understand Bitcoin if you don't understand the blockchain, right? And to keep it simple, a blockchain is simply a record of transactions that is broken up into blocks. So let's say we had 100 transactions and we wanted to break them up into blocks of 20. That would give us 5 blocks, right? So now we have a short blockchain of 5 blocks. And this is exactly how cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin function. They break up information into pieces, and then they close off that information and add it to the previous block of information. Then the next block comes around. Let's say it's open for 10 minutes. All the transactions that occur in those 10 minutes get filled into that block, gets closed off, added to the ones that came prior to it. Now, the reason why this is important is because all of this information is kept secure through cryptography, right? Which is basically what we call today encryption. And it means that it takes information and turns it into really long information in comparison to what it used to be, so that it's hard to decipher. So let's say we take your name, and your name is John Doe. Well, now we encrypt that information, and instead of it being 7 characters, right? 4 for John, 3 for Doe, it now becomes this long string of 75 characters. So someone would have to have a key to decipher those 75 characters and be able to read them as John Doe. That's encryption, and that's exactly how blockchain protects all of the information within the blocks. And the longer that the blocks become, the longer that the chain becomes, the harder it is to crack this encryption. Now, the reason why this is so cool is because this isn't kept in one central place. So there is no bank that holds all of this information. Instead, it's kept on a network of computers all across the world, okay? And so you would have to basically own more than 50% of those computers. You would have to have the power to manipulate more than 50% of those computers in order to even have a chance of looking at any of the information in just a few of the blocks within the blockchain. And for most people, that's impossible, okay? You just can't get 50% of the computing power from, computers, thousands of computers all over the world. So that makes it really secure. So how is this network supported in a way in which computers all over the world process these transactions and keep everything secure because there are so many of them and no one has the computing power to overcome that? Well, that's something called mining. And basically, each and every one of those computers that are all across the world connected to the Bitcoin network and processing these transactions belong to someone. And so that person, or those persons who spend the time and the energy, the electricity to process these transactions for Bitcoin, right? What's the return on investment for them? Well, the system is designed so that every time the system updates, the ledger is updated, which is this huge ledger with millions of transactions going all the way back to the very first one. Bitcoin pays out a small amount of Bitcoin to the people who have been mining it, who have been updating the ledger with their computing power. And that is why Bitcoin can be a decentralized currency, as opposed to normally money is controlled by a central bank. Like in America, it's the Federal Reserve. It's a private corporation that manages America's money. And whenever America wants more money, they just go ahead and they print more. Why is this important? Because when you have centralized banking, it means that bankers and governments are the people in control of the currency. And so they can tax it. It can be susceptible to hyperinflation, right? If something goes wrong with the economy, if there's a war, there's all these different scenarios that can affect the value of that money because it is controlled in a centralized place. So for instance, in Zimbabwe, a couple years back, they had this issue with hyperinflation. The Zimbabwe dollar lost its value because the government was managing the country very poorly. And so what ended up happening was a loaf of bread ended up costing 35 million Zimbabwe dollars. So imagine you go to bed one day and you have 35 million Zimbabwe dollars and you have like a lot of money. And then you wake up the next day and the government's been messing things up all over the place. And now all that money can only buy you a loaf of bread. The reason why that happens was because the government controls the money. And as they start to misspend or print too much money or do any other number of things that can affect the economy, the value of your money will fluctuate based on those decisions that the central bank, the government, makes for you. Okay? When your money is decentralized, it's not controlled by a government or a bank. And so what ends up happening is you might be in Zimbabwe, but if you have Bitcoin, when everybody else wakes up in the morning and their Zimbabwe dollars are no longer worth anything, your money's value has not changed, right? And now you might hear, oh, the price of Bitcoin has gone up. It's astronomical. It's exploding. It's so awesome. That's true. But the reason why that happened is because people started to realize its actual value and they started to try and get more of it. And as more people started to get more of it, other people said, wait a minute, there's a lot of money to be made. Let's invest in this. And that's called speculation. And so you end up having people who are buying and selling and the price is going up, just like stocks on the stock market. And that eventually will stabilize because there's only but so much Bitcoin that will ever exist. And it's about 21 million Bitcoins that will ever exist. And just like land, if something is a limited resource, over time, it will always increase in price. So now you might say, well, what if Bitcoin, people just stop using it? The reality is that even if Bitcoin does go out of fashion, there will be another digital currency or a number of other digital currencies that will come along and take its place. In my opinion, I don't see that happening. I think Bitcoin is here to stay. It's basically the granddaddy of cryptocurrencies, and we're going to continue to see these in our lifetimes going ahead into the future. One of the other main reasons why this is so important is because if you have a central bank and they control the flow of money, when you do a transaction, the way that it works right now is you go and you make a check or you swipe your debit card and they're going to say, okay, we're going to hold that amount of money. Let's say you're doing a transaction for $10. We're going to hold that $10 and now we're going to send it to the bank for the store. And then it's going to take some time for us to clear that transaction. And then we will debit that from your account. But if you only have $9.95 in your account, I'm going to have to cover you on that nickel. And since I covered you on that nickel, now I have to charge you $35 for an overdraft fee. This will never happen with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. The reason why is there is no central bank there to tax you and to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to take advantage of you because you made a miscalculation. What ends up happening is you send Bitcoin as simply as you would send an email. And if you don't have the Bitcoin to cover the transaction simply doesn't go through. No overdraft fees. If you try to send Bitcoin right now to someone across the world, in a matter of a couple of minutes, they'll have the Bitcoin in their account. If I try to send money right now through Western Union to, let's say, Senegal in Africa, they might receive it. I'm definitely paying for the privilege of sending my money to somebody in another place in the world. And if Senegal has a corrupt government or some central bank or some taxing fees, or they decide they're just going to take everybody's money or lock the banks down like Greece has done in the past and a bunch of other countries, well, now I just lost my money, right? So these are some of the reasons why a digital currency like Bitcoin is so important and so convenient. And lastly, the other thing about blockchain is this. Nowadays, there's this new thing where people go and they hack hospitals. And so they basically tell the hospitals, hey, we have all your medical records. If you don't pay us a certain amount of money, we're not going to give them back. You'll lose access to it. You won't know how to treat your patients. People are going to die. With blockchain, you can protect everyone's information just like as if they were transactions on the Bitcoin, but it's actually just for the purpose of protecting medical information. In that same way, in the future, you're going to see that we're going to have digital identities that are protected with blockchain. So it's not going to be so easy for people to come along and steal your identity, right? And also voter fraud, for instance. There's going to be an elimination of voter fraud because when you vote that one time, they're going to know that you voted everywhere in the world that accesses that voter log or that blockchain of voter information for that particular election. No more dead people voting, right? No more people going out, grabbing some dead guy's name and voting in his name. No more guy going and voting at one voting station, then driving 20 miles and voting at another voting station. All of that is eliminated. And so now our votes will be more secure and more confident. We won't be able to say, hey, well, there was a whole bunch of cheating going on, because that will have been eliminated with the technology called blockchain. So our next question is, where can I use Bitcoin? And companies like Microsoft, Expedia.com, Whole Foods, Subway, the Dallas Mavericks, Dish Network, Overstock.com, Shopify, and Etsy stores, there's a ton of places where you can currently use Bitcoin. And as time continues, that number is just going to increase. Because right now, we're really early in terms of how fresh this technology is. You're hearing about it all in the news and stuff like that, but most people that are hearing about it don't even know what it is, right? Much less are participating in it. But give that 3 or 4 years maybe, and it'll really be mainstream. You'll know that Bitcoin is mainstream when you can ask a little kid on the street, hey, what's a Bitcoin? And they can explain it to you. If you ask them what money is, they can explain that to you. So eventually the same thing is going to happen with cryptocurrencies, and then it's really going to increase in value, and it's also going to be accepted just about everywhere. If I wanted to go out and buy a Tesla today, I can buy it in Bitcoin because they accept Bitcoin. There's a lot of different homes, especially in California and more upscale areas, that are now only accepting payment through Bitcoin. You know why? Because everybody knows if I take my payment in Bitcoin and I just hold on to that money, eventually it's going to be more valuable than what they just paid me. Because if they gave me $100, but I hold on to this Bitcoin for a while, it may be worth 1,000 someday. So our next question is, where can I buy Bitcoin? The place I recommend is Voyager. It's where I buy my Bitcoin. When you sign up, if you use my referral link, you get a free $25 in Bitcoin when you spend $100. And it's really well done for people who are non-technical. It's basically like using your typical banking app. So the takeaways are, blockchain is a revolutionary technology that is changing the world. Currency is just the tip of the iceberg. It's still early on. Anyone who gets involved now will have a serious advantage over those who are going to sit along the sidelines and wait for a time to come. So I hope you enjoyed the video and it answered your questions about Bitcoin. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.